I'm gonna move on to this little game I like to play with my guests. It's called Choose Between Two. So what I'm
Okay.
gonna do here, Chris, I've got a couple of questions I'm gonna throw your way, which I tried my best to kind of like really cater to the tastes of
Yeah.
my guests. So I'm gonna give you two options, and you're gonna choose between two, and just give me a little bit of a explanation
Sure.
as to why. So let's
Okay.
get started with this. I know you're a big Stallone fan, like I am, but I want to ask you to choose between two of his more kind of like not as big as Rocky and Rambo, but two of his like fan favorites here.
Yeah.
Cobra or Tango and Cash.
Cobra.
Ah, that was pretty
The
quick.
the reason I'll say Cobra is so Tango and Cash when I was young, that I would have told you that would have been my choice. But I found revisiting both of them recently because I did a show, Stallone Revisited.
Yeah.
I found that Cobra held up better over the years. And I also have because I think Stallone's visual style of the film is really interesting because he did it all in kind of this MTV aesthetic, right? It wasn't him who directed it, it was George Pancosmatos. But if you know anything about George
Yeah.
Pancosmatos,
Yeah. Kind of.
directed
Yeah.
it. It's very much Stallone's movie. And if you watch that and Rocky Four back to back, they're done very similarly.
Yeah.
But I also have a nostalgic reason for Cobra because when I was a kid, I remember the first time I ever stayed alone at home without a babysitter. I was like 11 years old. And I remember my parents were like, well, you can rent whatever movies you want. So I remember I rented Super Mario Brothers with Bob Hoskins. And then there was a deal at the video store. It was like you rent one new movie, you get an old one free. And then I went to the action section. I was like, oh, Cobra. And I remember watching Cobra for the first time alone and thinking, nothing bad is going to happen to me alone because I'm with my buddy. I'm with Stallone, right?
Hmm.
Everything will be fine. And there's just that comforting thing, even though it's a dark, dark movie. But I also really like the aspects of horror that he works into that movie. Like it's almost like a Giallo movie, like
You're right.
he works in like some pretty graphic horror type slasher tropes almost. And I find that very interesting because no other movie he's ever done has been as harsh in some ways and has done that. He doesn't like it though. It was brought up to him at TIFF at this Q&A that I went to, and he said he always thought it was half baked, half of a great movie, half of a shitty movie. And I don't agree. I think it's an awesome movie, but it was very heavily re-edited by Warner Brothers, and they cut like a half hour out of the movie. That's why it's only like 85 minutes long. But I
Hmm.
think it's a great film. I like Tango and Cash, but you can also tell that that movie had like three or four directors, right?
Hmm.
That were just kind of revolving door. Plus, it had John Peters. It's another movie too. Like Cocaine directed that movie to some extent.
Hmm.
Very 80s, very like the hair. Everybody's hair in the movie is so ridiculous, and it's just so slick, right? Although I still really enjoy it, but I would choose Cobra every time.
Next one. Pacino or De Niro?
That's a really hard one. The first guy that comes to my mind is probably Pacino, I would say, and which is weird because I think probably De Niro is a better actor, but I
Hmm.
think for me, Pacino, I think of Carlito's Way, which I love. Uh, and I mean, it's funny because I mean, even De Niro's movies, I probably like more than Pacino's movies, to be honest, because Pacino really goes full ham in a lot of films and is kind of terrible in a lot of his movies. But there's just something about him, though. I don't know what it is, and it's like, The Irishman, I really liked. But I found that when you watch that movie, like Pacino really almost wipes the floor with De Niro in that movie, right? Like he's
Right.
so much better in it. And it's the same thing. Even though De Niro is great in Heat, I find Pacino is always cooler when they're on screen. Like of the two, who's the coolest in that movie? It's Pacino, right? Like there's something about him. I don't know what it is. But I mean, I love both of them almost equally. But it's funny. I mean, even De Niro's movies I like more than Pacino's movies, like Goodfellas, probably my favorite movie, and he's not in it. But my mind just immediately goes to Pacino. I don't know why.
I think with the movies versus performance thing, that De Niro, of course, he's got the Scorsese connection, but I think the filmmakers that he worked with as well are much more of a higher kind of
They
trajectory
are.
of
They are. They
filmmaker compared to
absolutely are.
Pacino.
They absolutely are. But it's like as a movie star, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's Pacino. I just don't even know if I could quantify it, like how I feel about the difference between the two of them. It's just strange. When I play a game like this, it's the first thing that comes to my mind is the answer that I have to go for, and I don't know why, but it's Pacino. Probably largely because of Carlito's Way, though, because that to me that's one of the great movie star performances. Like nobody's
Yeah.
ever been cooler than Al Pacino is in Carlito's Way.
And just a controversial opinion, just mine, but I actually prefer Carlito's Way over Scarface as well. That's
Oh,
just my
and me
opinion
too.
too.
It's not even close for me. I think Carlito's Way is significantly. I like Scarface, but
Me too.
Carlito's Way to me is one of the great gangster movies of all time.
I know that we were just saying before, like you were around that time where Sundance is really picking up in the independent scene, and two big
Yeah.
names came from the independent scene of the 90s. Quentin Tarantino or Paul Thomas Anderson, which of the two do you prefer?
Uh, it, that's another one that's weird because like Paul Thomas Anderson directed probably my second favorite movie of all time, Boogie Nights. But I have to say Tarantino, just because I think Tarantino, as a film fan, is and just as somebody who's pushed the discussion of cinema further than anybody else, it's him, especially for his podcast, the Video Archives podcast that he does with Roger Avery. And I think the thing about Tarantino is he's legitimately a great guy. You know, I met him. He couldn't have been nicer. Very approachable, which I wouldn't say about necessarily some of these other auteurs. He's very approachable, very laid back, just loves movies and loves to talk about movies. Will talk to movies about you if you go up to him. He doesn't like to talk about his own movies, but if you go up to him and you say, I saw this great movie on TV the other night and it's something obscure from the 70s, he'll be like, oh, yeah, yeah. And he'll get really into it. And, and just the fact that him and Avery had that, that fraught relationship for many years, but then Avery had a really kind of dark period in his life where he went to jail. And when he got out, Tarantino was there waiting for him. And he's like, let's start a podcast. And then the fact that they were able to reconnect and bring Avery's daughter in, to me, that's moving. And that shows that Tarantino is one of the rare guys out there that I would say, is legitimately a good person, regardless of whatever you say. He has controversial opinions and he's got an ego, that's for sure, but it's almost deserved in his case. And I think that when it comes down to it, he's one of the more genuine people in Hollywood.
You're at the cinema. What's your go-to snack? Popcorn or candy?
I don't do either, to be honest. Like, because I see
Okay.
I many movies. If I was to, I get really fat. I do like popcorn now and then, but typically when I go to a movie, it's in the morning at a press screening, and it's always coffee and a croissant is what I always
Yeah.
bring in. That's my movie snack these days. And sometimes I saw The Beekeeper the other day in a matinee, and I snuck in some sushi. I tend to always
Mm.
sneak food in because I don't like movie theater food, and I'm always chugging coffee when I'm watching a movie every time.
Last one, streaming or physical media?
Oh, I mean, I'm a physical media guy. I can't afford it necessarily, but the thing about streaming, and I've always told people this, is that, you can, even if you buy something digitally, in some ways it's a long-term rental. It's not
Mm.
necessarily something that you own, whereas physical media, you own it. And I've been doing kind of a series recently about movies that are surprisingly hard to find, and there's a lot
Yes.
of surprisingly big movies out there that you can't get anymore, like Cocoon. You'd think
Mm.
Cocoon would be an easy film to find because it was such a big hit when it came out in the 80s. The sequel is everywhere, but the original is not. And that's a very strange thing to me. And that tells you about, I've even kept all my DVDs. I got rid of the cases and I keep them all in binders. But it's like I like to have a good base of physical media so that, if ever these streaming sites just vanish and take everything down, at least I've got my favorite movies that I can go back to.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.